Alrighty. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking some time out of your day to join us. We're going to be going over the Autodesk Live Design workflow. So a little bit of the setup before we get going. So Microdesk, a little bit about us. We are an AECO industry consulting firm. We've been doing this since about '94. We currently have 12 locations, one of which is actually in the UK, so we're now international. Our team there is at this point, over 100 different technology consultants. So what that means is that people that have actually worked in the field. I worked as an architect for about 10 years before moving over to Microdesk and focusing on the consulting side of things. We got the same kind of people on civil, structural, mechanical, different backgrounds. We know the tools, and we actually understand how they were actually used. So we partner with a lot of different companies to work with them. So like IBM with Maximo for the facility side, EcoPoint for knowledge sharing with Pinnacle. So a lot of different companies to make sure our clients are successful. Now, today's presentation is going to be given by myself, Peter Marchese. I'm the Senior Technology Evangelist over at Microdesk. So what that means is that I get to play around with all the new tools and toys, come up with actual workflows that are actually useful. So new things like UAVs or drones or virtual reality, they're great new technology, but just because something is cool doesn't make it useful. So I actually work with our clients and with the rest of our team and come up with actual useful workflows that can take advantage of the technology. Now, the Autodesk Live Design workflow. So what we're going to be covering today is basically what is live. We'll talk a little bit about what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So again, having a really cool piece of technology is nice, but unless it's actually doing something, it's fixing a problem or solving an issue, it's just a piece of cool tech. So we'll go over what we're trying to fix with this, go a little bit over the workflow, and then over the main two components of this, Autodesk Live and Stingray. Then we'll wrap up and answer questions. Now, for the duration, everybody here is on mute. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop it into either the Q&A or into the chat window. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I'll be trying to answer things as we get rolling. Now, just before we get rolling, though, I would like to ask the audience a couple of questions. So I'm going to pop a quick poll up here. I'm trying to get an idea of who my audience is to make sure that if I'm giving certain examples, it's actually going to be fitting for you. Yeah, perfect. So, mostly it's CAD and BIM management, but we have some designers in here. Great. And then, how many of you are actually currently using Revit? Okay. But most of you, yes. A few of you are saying no. Don't worry, we can still use these tools with software, with content that's coming from other programs as well. Has anybody here been working with virtual reality? Yeah, plenty of people. Perfect. And then the last one here, and then we'll get rolling. Okay, that was the game engine. This is the virtual reality question. Good, nice mix. All right, on to the actual presentation. Thank you very much for your time there and for your answers. So what's the main problem we're looking at? So main thing is when a designer tries to explain their design, a lot of the times up until now we've been focusing more on 2D drawings. The problem we come from that is a lot of people outside the industry, and in all honesty a bunch of them inside the industry, have trouble actually reading these drawings and understanding what's happening in elevation, 3D, and perspective. You know, some can look at it and immediately visualize that, but not everybody can. Now, as we've developed our software and the way that we work, we've got to the point where we can go into and create a nice 3D perspective view. And that's still pretty good. it starts to give us an idea of what things will look like in 3D. It helps explain the problem. It helps explain our intent. And from there, we can actually take that and start to animate that. The problem that we tend to run into, both from a perspective side as well as the animation side, is that we're on rails. We're walking through here, and I'm like, well, oh, hey, red doors. What's behind? Wait, I want to go. Oh, okay, maybe not. Start walking through here. You look up the stairs, and you're like, why is that just floating there? But because the presentation, the walkthrough is essentially a movie, it's animated, you're going where somebody felt you'd want to go, as opposed to where you naturally want to look, where you want to go. So we're trying to look at different tools that make things much more interactive and much more understandable to a person who maybe doesn't know anything about architecture, but wants to be able to get into the project and start to see how things are going to look, see how it's actually going to feel. Okay. So our solutions now, there's a bunch of them that are out there. So Iris VR is great when it comes to taking a Revit model and sending it straight into VR. Revisto has some options. Lumion is great for just doing a very quick presentation setup. And Enscape is similar to that. And if we're looking at things that are much more interactive, then we start looking at game engines. And Unity is probably the one that most people have heard of. Unreal is probably the most powerful one of those ones. And the other ones are very good as well. It just depends on what you're trying to do and how you want to navigate things. And the problems that we tend to run into, though, is that if we want to actually add interactivity, and we're using one of the game engines that are listed here, you're going to have to deal with the materials. What I mean by that is that if I take a Revit model and I send it directly to one of the game engines here, I'm going to have to export it out, and that's fine. But what's going to happen is that it's not going to maintain my materials. It's going to need me to either reapply all of them, or it's going to need me to go through different steps inside of something like Maya or Max and essentially bake all of those materials into it. So if I didn't do that, I basically get what I have here. What looks like a big foam core model. Everything's all white or sort of a gray tone. So what I'm trying to avoid is that whole issue that we run into from that sawtooth diagram. As one of the benefits of moving to BIM is hopefully we have much less of a gap as we go from, say, SD to DD, DD to CD. I want to just move smoothly through that. And if I'm constantly having to go to a different presentation tool and redo things and lose time, that's kind of going against that. So we're looking for a good workflow that avoids that issue and helps us get exactly what we want. And in terms of bringing our creations to life, we don't necessarily have to electrocute our models, although it sometimes helps to be a little cathartic. But what we're looking at here is the Autodesk Live workflow. And Live essentially is two things. Number one, it's actually the name of one of the programs, but it's more or less the idea of that package of tools. And what we're going to start off looking at here is Revit. And again, I noticed a few of you said you're currently not using Revit. That's okay. We can still take advantage of some of these tools. But now, if we're starting off from Revit, though, we can upload that model to the cloud. And that model is then going to be processed and cleaned up, and the materials will be baked onto it, and I'll be able to open it up directly into Autodesk Live. That's one of the two features on this service. So inside of Live, then I can decide how do I want to navigate this project? How do I want to look at this? Do I want to actually keep it on my desktop, or do I want to start looking at it on a mobile device like an iPad? Do I want to just navigate it sort of normally with a mouse, keyboard, or even a video game controller? Or do I want to send this to a virtual reality headset and really experience my design of the space? Now, the benefit of the Live side of things here is that it's really simple to get into, and it's very user-friendly. I can just walk around, and things that are categorized correctly, as like a door, they're automatically going to be animated to open and close when I get there, which is nice. But if I'm looking to do much more, so let's say I want to actually add lots of animations or interactivity. In that case, I'll go the other direction. I can send my Revit model to 3D Max, and then I can send it to Stingray. Now, Stingray is the game engine side of things, and just like Live, I have the ability to send it to a mobile device or onto virtual reality headsets if I want to. I can look at it, it's kind of in beta, but I can look at it online as well. And the cool thing is you're not locked into going one route or the other. You can actually go back and forth between these two. So if I just want to start off with something really simple, Revit into Live, perfect, that looks good. But you know what I'd really like to do is add more to my scene. Maybe I want to have birds chirping in the background, something flying around, moving people or cars. Okay, I can take my Live model, send it to Stingray, tweak it a bit, and then push it back. So you do have some flexibility in here in terms of what you want to do. Now, on the Autodesk Live side, again, it's Revit to the cloud to live. Very simple. You're basically going to be in your Revit model. And you would click on that little Go Live button. So once you've installed the actual live application, you'll get that plugin inside of Revit. And then as I go through this process, it's going to give me a couple of options and some feedback. If I have a section box on to cut certain portions of my model away, it's going to confirm, did you want that to actually happen? Because it's really going to be a what you see is what you get. If I have things turned on in the view, they're going to get exported. If I have things turned off or cut out of the view, they won't be. If I meant to have my view as fine level of detail instead of coarse, I have the option here to say fix. So the nice thing is here for certain things, it'll take care of the problem or issue for me without having to say cancel and go back and forth. Other ones like here, it's telling me if it cannot find the material that I need to use, it's going to let me know, and then I can close out of this and then come back after I've corrected my material library, basically making sure that it can find all of the colors and materials setup that I want. So if I have linked files, it's going to let me know that all of them need to be on the same file, same version. This will, again, export anything that's visible in the view. So if I do have a linked file, that linked file will come across with this when I export it. Additionally, what I can do here is tell it that I want to extend the terrain into the horizon. Now, in the example that I have here in the image here, you can kind of see how the topo just goes out maybe 30, 40 feet and stops. What would happen here is that if you actually decide to uncheck the extend the horizon, you would literally have exactly what you see here. You'd have the building on some topo sort of floating in space. But if I say extend the terrain to horizon, what's going to happen is it's going to take that topo and just make it go all the way out, and then it'll put in sort of a false, mountainscape and skyline. So it tries to help make it clean. But once I get everything all dialed in, I'll say I want to upload it. It'll then pop up a little window here and start going through the process. It'll upload the model, go through the percentage so it knows how far it is. Once it's actually uploaded, you're fine. Now it's in the cloud. So if you need to close Revit or shut down your laptop, you're good to go. You don't have to keep everything open anymore. But as it goes along, it'll prepare it, and once it's finished, it'll actually download that model locally. So I'm just going to hop into Live real quick. And what I'm looking at right now is the Live editor. So if you're familiar with Navisworks, just a quick segue here. Navisworks has Navisworks that is paid and you would use, and then you have Navisworks Freedom that is free and anybody can download and utilize. Live is similar. Now, if you are paying for the Live service, it doesn't come with the current collections at the moment. So right now it's still sort of a separate patch. But when you have that service, you have two things. The Live editor, which is the paid one. I'm going to open up my model here. You also have the Live viewer, which anybody can download and use. So somebody who has the editor can take the result of this, and if they would like to, they can maybe tweak some things. They can clean up or create brand new saved views. And once they've got everything ready, then they can come over here and say that they'd like to actually publish to either the iPad or to Windows. A live view or a live model here that's been published to Windows can be opened up but not edited or changed in the free viewer for anybody. Same thing for the iPad. So if you do have something here that looks really great and you want to share it with a client, perfect. I can just go here, publish it, send that to them, and then they can open it up. And also, if you look at the background here, this is what it did with the extend terrain to horizon. I don't have sort of a block here or a square where the topo was. It goes off into the different directions. And all of the trees that I had here, those trees are also not that sort of that little stick figure that was inside of the Revit model. So the RPCs were taken and shown here. Now currently you see all these little push pins that are in the ground. Those are the different views that I have. If I want to, I can say I don't want to actually see those anymore. I can turn on or off my lights. And if you're wondering where my lights are, if I actually turn it so it's dark, now you can see my lights. So I can very quickly start changing the time of day. I can also start changing the time of year. And for a lot of different projects, if I click over there, I'm just going to walk up to the building. Notice I got to fix that sign. But one of the things that I can actually do is start to modify how my character is interacting with this building. And what I mean by that is when I click on this, I can set my height. As a designer, I want to make sure that my model, my design, my building is comfortable for different kinds of users. So if I want to make sure that I'm going to be ADA compliant, I might want to interact with my design as somebody in a wheelchair. I want to make sure that I still have the correct view lines. I want to make sure that they can still see the right signage or can access the right counter height. So this allows me to change that height to those specific people or just manually move it up and down. Now if I click in here into the space, it will automatically navigate towards the doors. Those will open and get out of the way. And then I can start moving around. So I can very quickly start to move through my space, navigate through that. I can start setting things up in terms of people, if I want to have them on or off. And then I can also tweak my view style if I do want to have all my colors, or if I want to make it a little bit more artistic where it's all grayscale, or just the building itself is grayscale set against the green of my topo. But again, the interface here is designed to be very simple and user-friendly. And if I want to make it even simpler, I tell it to go into presentation mode, and it cleans up the interface even more. And if I want to, I can just cycle back and forth between the views that are in here by clicking on the arrow. So, meant to be a very simple and user-friendly tool. And if you do have a virtual reality headset, all I have to do to take it into VR is click on that button, and that'll actually bring it and turn on my headset so I can utilize that. Now, this is the one on the desktop. If what I'd like to do is take a look at the iPad version, you're going to find it's going to be very similar. You start off, you can actually have your images of the different models you've loaded. When you open those up, you'll get the little moment please. And just like before, it logs in. I can navigate. I can see things. You'll see the user interface and the buttons are the exact same thing that we saw before on the desktop. I can click on elements, and that'll actually bring me down into the model. If I click on the floor there, it's actually going to navigate down into that space. And it understands the actual model itself. So when you click there, it'll find the ramp, walk its way down the ramp, and then walk towards that space. And again, just like the desktop version, I can navigate, I can change the time of day. If I click on specific objects after clicking on the info button, it'll actually give me the information from the Revit model. Again, this isn't just making sort of a dumb model. Similar to Navisworks, where if I bring a Revit file into that, you can click on objects and see the properties. I can do the exact same thing inside of this. Cool. So that's live. That's very simple, easy to use navigation presentation tool. Not meant to be crazy or to make it hard for someone to work with. Still very powerful, but meant to be easy. Stingray, on the other hand, is not as simple to work with. It is a game engine. And in terms of a game engine, it's not necessarily something like that. It doesn't run on pellets. But the easiest way to think of a game engine is it's a sandbox. So if you think of a sandbox, it could be as simple as you want. You want to just make a couple of forms and walk through it, great. Or if you want to have a lot of time and put a lot of effort into it, it could be completely amazing and crazy. It really depends on what you want to get out of it. Now, in terms of Stingray, getting our work from Revit into there, and in this case, the people who are currently not using Revit, this is perfect because I can use Max or FBX and bring in just about any file format I need. I'm focusing on the Revit aspect, but if you are not using Revit, Stingray can still be utilized. So I can go from Revit to Max. I can also go from Revit to Live into Stingray. And if you're already inside of 3D Max, it's actually quite easy to get there. You'll note that there's a Stingray pull-down, and that has the ability to physically connect to that model. If it's the first time you're using it or there's a problem, I can always load my plugin manually. But once I've actually connected my Stingray to my Max, I can actually send models back and forth. I can actually set up my camera. You notice that one of the options here says live camera tracking. What that means is that I could lock the camera from a view in Max to a view in Stingray. So as I start to actually orbit my model, if I look up, look down, left, right, that kind of stuff, it's doing it in both programs. So if I find it easier to navigate one versus the other, or I'm trying to orbit it inside of Stingray, and then I want to modify that model in Max, I can. And then I can just easily push that model back, sending it back to Stingray. So there's actually quite a nice workflow here to do that. Now, the other thing is that if we do have our model from Live, I mentioned we can go from Live to Stingray as well. In that case, what we end up doing is taking our Live model, and notice how it has the extension there, the LVND. That's literally Live model. I can rename that as a zip file or open it up in something like 7-zip, and then I can just extract that data. Once I've extracted that data out, I can then open it up into Stingray. Done. If you have a model that, or a project in Stingray that is already in work, you're already working in there, it has content, and I want to add this to it as opposed to creating a brand new one, then I would actually just choose those two pieces and send that into Stingray. And then I can get to work. There's one or two little things that you'd have to tweak inside of Stingray outside of that, but that's really the gist. And one of the issues, if you tried this in the past, you had to stay on an earlier version. That's actually not the case anymore. They recently updated Stingray and Live, and both of them are now on the same release number. So I can go back and forth that way. So I'm going to hop into Stingray now. Now, when you're working with Stingray, one of the things that you'll notice is that you have a launcher that you end up getting. So when you install it, you've got that launcher. And each time that there's actually an update to Stingray, what you'll notice is that it actually doesn't overwrite the old version. The reason for this is sort of similar to Revit. I can always move my projects forward, but I can't save backwards. So if I have a project that's in flux and I'm working on it and I don't necessarily want to upgrade it, this will keep the older version of Stingray, so that way I can keep working on it. But once I've determined which one I want to open, I tell it I want to launch that. That then opens up Stingray. And then essentially what I'll end up having is this dialog window. This will actually show me the different models and projects that I have open. It'll show me where that file exists and actually what version it is too. So that way I can confirm, am I opening up the correct thing? I want to see that. And if it's not the current version, it'll show it in a different color. So hopefully it's a little bit more obvious to everybody who's on there. Now if I'm looking to create a new project, I can look at my templates. This gives me a handful of different tools and types that I can work off of. And if I want to download some samples just to play around with and see how certain aspects of the tool work, just come over to Online Projects, and then I can download some examples. So there's a lot to actually work here, even if you're just starting off. Now, overall, once you get rolling, it's going to be pretty user-friendly in terms of the interface, once you get it down. And I mentioned Navisworks before, but if you've used Navis, the UI here is going to be very similar. So I've got my viewport with some view tools. So these are going to be the ones where I can actually select, move, rotate, scale elements. You're going to have your browser on the bottom, typically, your asset browser, your console for looking at the log, my preview, and my properties, and then my tools here. But near all of these, you'll see little plus symbols. And what those plus symbols are is the ability for me to add more windows, more tools. So if there's something in here that I wanted to actually take a look at, like let's say I wanted to make a walkthrough or a cinematic. So rather than having the client fly around the building and have to control the camera, I'd rather just hit a button and then have the camera fade to white, come back, and then orbit the building and then come back and give them the control. I can essentially do that with the story editor, but it's hard to read here. It's kind of tiny. So I can actually pull this off, and as I'm pulling it, similar to Navisworks, I have the ability to modify how that window actually connects to the other windows. Is it going to be tabbed or not? Or do I want it to be a completely separate window? So I can drag this onto a different monitor if I want, and I can also add more pieces to this one too. So you can manage and modify the user interface here to suit your workflow and how you want to set things up. Now, one of the neat things about this is that as I'm looking at my model here, I can click on the objects, I can see the properties, what physics are happening here, if they are happening on anything. I can give things different names and set them up that way. But the nice thing is, if I want to tell certain things to do something, again, a lot of the reason that we would be going into Stingray is because we want to add interactivity. The problem, or the thing that really holds a lot of people back, is they say they can't program. Well, the nice thing is, there's a lot of visual programming tools out there now. So if everybody here uses Revit or is aware of Revit, you might have actually heard of something like Dynamo or another tool called Grasshopper. Within Stingray, there's a thing called level flow. And this is very similar to the other thing. So let's say that what I want to have happen is whenever I hit a certain object, something happens. In this case, that's exactly what this is. I have a physical object that is set up as a trigger. That trigger here is that yellow box. So this sort of gate between these two columns, that area, I've assigned that here as a trigger. What I've also done is set that when I touch that box, I want it to toggle on or off visibility of an object. So basically, I'm programming something without actually writing any code. I'm saying that if this happens, and maybe if I want to test it, I just tie it to a keyboard button too. When I walk through that area, I want an object to turn on and off. Another idea of that could be, as I walk into this space, I want the lights to turn on. I want the doors to open up. So I can start to automate and create this kind of interactivity without ever having to type any code. If I want to actually create that story I mentioned, again, I hit that keyboard button, waits a second, and then that story plays. And then at the end of it, I want to go back to my normal camera. If I want to toggle something on and off just by keyboard, same thing. On, off. If I want to tie it to a controller for a video game controller, I can do that. And this one here looks a little bit more complex, but it's really not that bad. But what this is doing is every time I hit a keyboard button, it's actually cycling through different materials that I've pre-assigned to an object. Again, one thing copied several times, each one of this is just choosing a different material and saying the next time I hit that keyboard button, I want you to move down to this level. Just a different method of saying that. And all I have to do to test this, to see if this is actually going to work, is tell it that I want to actually test my level. So that loads the current level that I'm working in, and then I can start actually walking through my space. I'm just using my keyboard right now. I'm going to walk over this area. And then I'm going to turn on gravity. There we go. Now, again, those two columns there are where I had that yellow box. And what's actually connected to it is that tiny set of stairs. So as I move to the left here, or sorry, to the right, if I remember my direction, that stair just disappeared. So by crossing this threshold, it's actually changing the visibility characteristics of that object. So similar to how I would want to maybe manage something, I can check that out and set that up. The other thing I can end up doing is turning other objects on and off with the key press. So this is just turning on or off that cylinder. But let's say that you had a presentation to a client and you wanted to easily hit a button and have it cycle between different design options. I can do that. Whether it's just a couple of elements and I have them turning on or off like this, or I'm changing it from one quote-unquote level to another level, like a video game level. You're going from level option A to level option B. And then that colored cylinder there, I'm just hitting another keyboard button, and that's cycling between the different colors that I've assigned to this. And you can see how even the reflection on the bottom there is changing the match. And then once I'm satisfied with how things are currently working, I just hit escape and I'm back working in my space. Now if I get to the point where, you know what, I'm really happy with this, I would like to publish this so that other people can work on this. In that case, then I just come over here and I say that I want to deploy this. And I choose how I'm going to deploy it. Do I want to put this out on a mobile device? Do I want to put this out on a desktop? If it's a desktop, I'll have a folder with content and then an exe or an executable that somebody can run. But the idea of Stingray, again, is it's really what you want to make out of it. It's a sandbox. If you're looking for something that is really simple, I just want to get in my model and walk around, and that's all I want to deal with. That's much more of Autodesk Live. But if I've done that, you know what, I really like that, but wouldn't it be nice if? That's usually the leading question. I'd really like it if I could hit this button and change that. Or if I can put on a VR headset and physically point at an object and turn it on and off. Or change the material or the wallpaper or the floor or anything like that. Once we start trying to create that level of interactivity, that's where the game engine comes in. And again, one of the big benefits of Stingray over the other ones is that because it's a part of the Autodesk ecosystem, it maintains my materials. I don't have to reapply them in Max or start over from scratch. If I've got a material inside of Revit and I send it through Max into here, it's going to pull that in as long as it's a basic material. And I can modify things in here, I can add more features, and I can tweak that. And if there's an asset inside the model where I want to actually start changing things, hop in here. I can always come in here and actually say I want to actually show it in Explorer, so find me the folder that's in there. And if I want to make a change, again, I can just say, you know what, send that object to 3D Max. Open it up in there. I can make some changes in it, and then I can send it back to Stingray and keep working in here. So you do actually have quite a nice workflow between the different tools. All right. So wrapping things up. We looked at working inside of Revit and sending it to live. It's pretty easy. You click on a button. As long as everything lines up and you're not getting any warnings or errors, you can just send it directly out to live. And that'll give us something that's very simple and easy to walk through, but also very striking and beautiful, because it's going to have all that rendered capability, but it's not going to be choppy as if I was trying to walk through it in the rendered mode inside of Revit. Very smooth. It's essentially like a game. If I want to take advantage of all the other features that a game might have, then I can send it to Stingray, and then I can create whatever abilities I'd like to have. And I don't need to know how to program. So if you do know how to program, you can take it even further. But if you don't feel comfortable programming or you don't know it, not a problem. You can take advantage of that visual programming with the little nodes and connecting the dots between them. So that way it's easy. I put in, I want to hit this keyboard button. Okay, input button here. What do I want to do with it? I want to toggle visibility. Okay, put that one over here. And you're just connecting the dots that way. And once you've got a workout, a layout that you're happy with, I can actually save that out as a text file and load that into other projects so I don't have to recreate the wheel each time. Any questions that anybody might have? One question that came in earlier was, is Live part of their current subscription? Currently it is not. So if you have one of the design suites or one of the collections, Autodesk Live is currently separate from those. So and if you're going just with Live, that is going to be, I want to say something like $25 a month. I really want to double check on that. I think I might be off on that. But it is very inexpensive. And if you go for Stingray, that will actually come with Maya LT as well. So again, both of them are very affordable, especially when you compare to programs like Revit or AutoCAD. They're easy to get into, and they're very easy to afford. Another question, what is the difference between Navisworks and Live? Good question. So I mentioned Navisworks a lot because the interface is similar, and also how Navisworks can open up multiple file formats. Now, Navisworks is more for coordination. So whether that coordination is I just need to throw a bunch of models together and actually view them, or I want to bring them together and I want to look for clashes, or I want to start taking advantage of some of the other features, like doing cost estimating or four-dimensional timeline. The only two features of Navis that really kind of meshes up against Stingray is that 4D timeline or doing a rendering. Now, the 4D timeline in Stingray would be basically animating each aspect of it, but it would be typically rendered at a much higher quality and definitely much faster than Navis. So where Navis is more of a coordination tool, Stingray and Live are much more of a presentation tool. So I want to present, I want to show, I want to experience that space. And I'm going to be doing it in a fully rendered view, as opposed to Navis, which is typically going to be shown in like a shaded view. And that's not to say that you couldn't do almost like a pastel or a cel-shaded view inside of Stingray. You can. Another question, are all materials applied only in Revit? If we're talking about Live, and we're going from Revit to Live, then yes. However, if we're talking about Stingray, no, I can modify and change my materials after the fact. For most people, the big benefit, though, is that they don't have to do that if they're using Stingray. But if you were in Stingray and you're like, you know what, I don't really care how it looks inside of Revit. I just want to make sure it looks really nice here. You can just make that change inside of Stingray. So if you want to tweak the translucency of glass, if you want to get a better image that you want to use for the wood grain, you can do that all inside of Stingray. And then from there, if you wanted to send it from Stingray into Live, then you can do that. Okay, another question here. What is the best method if you use another rendering material like V-Ray in 3ds and you want to switch over to Stingray? Would you simply be able to copy the material bitmaps and then plug into Stingray materials? You could go that way, yeah. I believe there's a few people that have actually scripted the modification in 3D Max, so that way it would convert the materials from one type to the other one, and then you can just push it into Stingray. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I know some people have done that kind of scripting to tweak the materials so that way Stingray does read them. But otherwise, if what you're talking about like your bitmaps, they're just like a GIF or a JPEG, I can just take those and assign them to what I want inside of Stingray. Do the materials have to be PBR? I don't believe so. Good question. Does Stingray work with VR headsets? Yes, it does. When you're actually in Stingray, hop back in for 1 second. So if I say I want to go to my project manager, when you start off, you actually have a handful of different templates you can work with. So 4 of these templates are specific to virtual reality. If you're developing something for the mobile side, you've got VR Google or Gear. If you're developing something for the desktop side, you've got the HTC Vive as well as the Oculus Touch. That doesn't mean that if you started off on basic, you can't go back. But what it means is that those already start off with a lot of the under-hood coding, so that way it already knows how to connect to the headset. But yeah, Stingray definitely worked with virtual reality headsets, and it actually creates some really engaging results. Any other questions? What was the path to VR through Live? The path to VR through Live was actually just clicking on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It's kind of hard to see because it's trying not to be too obtrusive, but there's a little button down there that actually looks like the figure of a head wearing a headset. You click on that, and if you have your computer set up with one of the desktop VR, so again, the Rift or the Vive, it'll connect to that and send the model into there, and then you can navigate it in virtual reality. So Live and Stingray both will work with virtual reality. Alrighty. So I want to say thank you very much to everybody. I really appreciate your time. If there are questions that come up after the fact, please feel free to reach out to us. You can give us a phone call, email, or check our website. This presentation should be posted to our YouTube channel in probably the next couple of days. And if you'd like to see what's coming up, we actually have 2 more webinars in the next month. Next one coming up is BIM 360, sort of a workflow overview, going over what tools are currently available, where we see them going, find out how much I'm allowed to say. And then the one after that is going to be on generative and analytical design. So I mentioned Dynamo and Grasshopper today. This is going to focus on a little bit of that, but also what's next after that, where we start taking machine learning and AI and throwing that into the mix. So hopefully some interesting presentations for everybody. Again, really appreciate your time. If anybody has any questions, reach out. But otherwise, you guys have a great day and watch out for the weather out there. Thank you very much.